A single dad pulls off at a rest stop to cook a simple dinner for his daughter unaware. The woman watching them from a nearby RV is a lonely billionaire who hasn't felt at home in years. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The sky had turned the color of steel wool, a dull gray that pressed low over the cracked stretch of highway. Wind whispered through the brittle trees that lined the edge of the rest stop, carrying the dry scent of dust and pine needles. It was the kind of place most people passed without a second glance, just a faded picnic table, a rusted trash can, and a patch of grass trying its best to survive the season. Thomas Morgan pulled their old minivan into a spot near the edge, engine sputtering before going quiet. He sat for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, watching as his daughter, Lily, unbuckled her seatbelt and bounced in place with the kind of energy only an 8-year-old could muster after a long drive. "Can we eat now?" she asked, her voice lifting with hope. "Yeah, kiddo," he said, forcing a tired smile. "Let's see what the pantry's got." The pantry was a cooler wedged behind the driver's seat, stocked with whatever he could scrape together before they left home. 2 hot dogs, half a bag of baby carrots, and a few slices of sandwich bread. Not gourmet, but better than nothing. He popped the trunk, pulled out their battered propane stove, and set it up on the worn concrete slab near the picnic table. Lily dragged over their single camp chair and sat cross-legged, watching him as he lit the burner with practiced hands. The flame flickered to life, casting a soft blue glow that danced in the gathering dusk. She hugged her knees and shivered in her jacket. "Think we'll see any stars tonight?" she asked. "Maybe," Thomas said. "If the clouds roll out." He placed the pan over the flame and dropped in the hot dogs, listening to them sizzle faintly. For a brief second, the scent of frying meat cut through the cold air and made the rest stop feel a little less empty. A few yards away, the tall shape of a white RV sat parked, lights glowing faintly inside, quiet as a mausoleum. Thomas didn't notice the woman watching from behind its tinted glass. But she saw everything. Every small gesture, every careful move of a father doing his best in the middle of nowhere. And something in her chest shifted, barely perceptible, but real. Vanessa Lane sat curled on the built-in bench seat by the window, her knees drawn to her chest, and a wool blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Outside, the cold settled in like a second skin, stretching shadows long and painting everything in the dull hue of early evening. The faint clatter of metal and the quiet pop of a flame reached her through the double-paned glass. She hadn't meant to look. But something about the flicker of movement just beyond the trees had caught her attention. She angled the window blind open a little farther. The mantel, maybe mid-30s, was crouched beside a portable stove, carefully rotating 2 small hot dogs in a dented frying pan. His posture wasn't rushed or careless. Every motion was deliberate, efficient. Nearby, a little girl sat wrapped in a puffy blue coat several sizes too big, her boots swinging above the cold ground. She was saying something to him, words lost on the wind, but whatever it was made him laugh, a low, warm sound she couldn't hear but somehow felt. They didn't see her. Why would they? Her RV, a sleek, state-of-the-art coach designed for quiet luxury, looked more like a showroom display than a home. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and cedar oil. Soft jazz played on low from the built-in speakers, and the espresso machine blinked politely in standby. It was comfortable, impeccable, empty. She took a sip from the mug in her hands, though the coffee had gone cold. She'd made it out of habit, just something to do. That was all she did lately. Small distractions to avoid the silence in her chest. Vanessa didn't know why she couldn't look away from them. Maybe it was the way the man glanced at the girl, not just checking on her, but seeing her, like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. Maybe it was the way they made a meal out of nearly nothing, with no bitterness or complaint. She shifted slightly, resting her cheek against the cold glass, and exhaled. They had less than she ever had, and yet something about them looked more like home than anything she'd built for herself. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like running. Thomas felt it before he saw it, that sense of being watched. A subtle shift in the air, like a shadow resting where it hadn't been a moment ago. He looked up from the pan just long enough to glance across the lot. The white RV sat quiet, its windows darkened by tint, but one small strip glowed faintly with movement behind it. Just a shape, a silhouette, then stillness again. He turned back to the stove. The hot dogs were nearly done, so he reached for the small plastic tub at his feet. Flipping open the lid to reveal a Ziploc bag of cooked pasta and a tiny container of shredded cheese. Lily clapped softly, a grin stretching beneath her pink fleece hood. "Mac and cheese time?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Best dinner on the highway," Thomas said with a wink. He tossed the noodles into the pan, added a splash of milk from the thermos, and stirred until the cheese began to melt into the mess of elbow macaroni. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't even hot enough. Not really. But it smelled familiar, comforting. The kind of dinner that came with shared glances and silly stories, and the occasional spilled spoon. Lily climbed onto the bench, her breath fogging the air as she waited patiently. Thomas spooned the food into a camping bowls, lightly chipped at the rye and handed it over. "Bon appetit, madam," he said with a mock bow. She giggled and took a big bite, humming happily around the spoon. Thomas watched her for a moment, then settled beside her, splitting the rest between two paper plates. They ate in sync, quietly, their faces glowing in the fading light of the tiny stove. He didn't look back at the RV again, though he could feel her gaze like the warmth of a campfire at his back. Whoever she was, whatever had brought her here, he figured she'd move on soon enough. They all did. But here, in this still moment, with a bowl of lukewarm mac and cheese and his daughter beside him, Thomas had everything he needed. No granite countertops, no linen napkins, just love served under a darkening sky. The wind had settled into a lazy sway through the trees, rustling brittle leaves across the pavement. Dinner was done, the dishes wiped clean with paper towels and packed back into their bin. Thomas was stretching his legs, arms crossed, as he looked toward the sky, searching for a sliver of starlight through the cloud cover. Lily, however, had other plans. "I think it needs salt," she said, tongue poking out in thought as she scooped up another bite of mac and cheese from the bowl she'd insisted on finishing. Thomas chuckled. "We're out. Used the last of it in Indiana, remember?" Lily tapped her spoon against her lip, considering. Then, without another word, she slid off the bench and trotted across the parking lot, her boots thudding softly on the concrete. "Hey, Lily," Thomas called after her, startled. "Where are you going?" "To ask the lady in the RV if she has some," she shouted back over her shoulder, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Thomas opened his mouth to protest, but she was already halfway there. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Great. Vanessa had seen the girl coming before Thomas had. She'd leaned back from the window out of instinct, her heart thudding for reasons she couldn't explain. And then, there she was. A little girl with wind-chapped cheeks, wide eyes, and the kind of boldness that only came from being raised with trust. "Hi," Lily said, stepping right up to the door of the RV. "Sorry to bother you. Do you have any salt?" Vanessa blinked, stunned. She hesitated, then stood and opened the door slowly. The cold crept in like a whisper as she stepped down, blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. "Salt?" she asked, confused but amused. "For mac and cheese. It's good, but not great," Lily said matter-of-factly. Vanessa smiled in spite of herself. "I might have some." Her voice softened. "Would you like me to bring it over?" Lily lit up. "Want to come with me? My dad made dinner. It's okay if you're hungry." Vanessa hesitated, then nodded, for the first time in a long while. She crossed the line between watching and being seen. Vanessa followed Lily across the lot, the tips of her boots catching tiny pebbles as she walked. The wind tugged at her blanket, and she pulled it tighter around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how much she didn't belong here out in the open, on cold pavement, stepping into someone else's world. A simple world, a warm one she hadn't felt part of in years. Thomas stood near the picnic table, arms crossed, brow creased, with the kind of caution that came naturally to a man raising a child alone. As they approached, he straightened. "Hey," he said, eyes flicking between Vanessa and his daughter. "Everything okay?" Lily answered before either adult could speak. "She had salt. Told you." Vanessa held out a small glass jar, the label worn off. "Hope this helps." Thomas took it with a nod, his expression unreadable. "Thanks. Appreciate it." There was a pause, just long enough for the silence to feel heavy before Vanessa extended a hand, fingers peeking from beneath the blanket. "I'm Vanessa." He looked at her, hesitated, then shook her hand with a firm grip. "Thomas, and that's Lily." Lily gave a little wave, already back to eating the last few bites in her bowl. Vanessa glanced at the small setup, the worn stove, the folding table, the Tupperware, and something in her chest gave a quiet, reluctant ache. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just watching from the window. You two looked happy." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Happy might be generous," he said with a faint smile, "but we manage." She nodded, unsure of what to say next. So she tried what she knew, a carefully curated version of the truth. "I've just been traveling for a while. Needed to get away. That RV's more home than anything else right now." He didn't press, and she appreciated that. He just nodded slowly, accepting it at face value. "Well, we've got more food if you're hungry," he said finally. "It's nothing fancy. Mac and cheese, hot dogs, a gourmet paper plate experience." Vanessa laughed, quiet but genuine. "Honestly, that sounds kind of perfect." And just like that, the space between them shifted, still unfamiliar, still fragilely, but a little less lonely than before. Vanessa hesitated only a second before lowering herself onto the picnic bench beside Lily, careful not to let her blanket slip too far from her shoulders. The seat was cold, slightly uneven, and the table bore the worn carvings of travelers' long-gone initials, hearts, a crude sketch of what might have once been a dog. It was a far cry from the polished wood and white linen she was used to, but somehow it felt more real. Thomas didn't make a fuss. He simply handed her a paper plate with a modest scoop of mac and cheese and half a hot dog sliced into bite-sized pieces. No garnish, no small talk, just a quiet gesture, one that said, "You're welcome here." "Thanks," Vanessa said, her voice soft, almost uncertain. She picked up the plastic fork and took a bite. It was warm, salty. The noodles were overcooked and clumped together in places, but she didn't care. Maybe it was the cold air, or the way Lily kept glancing over to make sure she was enjoying it, but something in the taste grounded her. For once, food wasn't performance. It wasn't being photographed or plated with tweezers. It was just food, honest and imperfect. Lily swung her legs beneath the table, kicking rhythmically. "Do you live in your RV?" Vanessa nodded, wiping a bit of cheese from the corner of her mouth. "Right now, yeah. It's kind of my house on wheels." "That's so cool," Lily said, wide-eyed. "It's like a spaceship. I bet it has everything." Vanessa smiled. "Just about. Tiny kitchen, tiny shower. Even a bed that folds out of the wall." Thomas chuckled, finally sitting down across from them. "We've got a fold-out blanket in the back of the van." "Doesn't sound quite as fancy." "Sounds like a memory," Vanessa replied, surprising even herself. They ate in near silence after that. The three of them tucked in close under a sky that had started to clear. A single star blinked through the clouds above. Vanessa looked up, then back at the paper plate in her hands. For the first time in what felt like years, she wasn't thinking about work or headlines or expectations, just a warm meal. A quiet moment. And the company of two people who didn't want anything from her but her name. The remains of dinner sat in a neat pile at the edge of the table-stacked paper plates, crumpled napkins. The nearly empty salt jar returned to Vanessa with thanks and a shy smile from Lily. The air had grown colder, but none of them moved to leave just yet. The kind of quiet that settled between strangers learning each other's rhythms had taken hold, not awkward, just unspoken. Thomas leaned back slightly on the bench, arms resting along the top rail. He looked across at Vanessa, studying her in the low light cast by the RV's exterior lamp. She sat with her hands around a chipped enamel mug he'd filled with the last of their cocoa powder, more warm water than chocolate, but she hadn't complained. If anything, she looked oddly content. "So," he said, his voice casual, "where you headed?" Vanessa traced the rim of the mug with her thumb, eyes fixed somewhere past the trees. "Nowhere," she said simply. "That's the whole point." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Nowhere?" She nodded. "I got in my RV 3 months ago, and just started driving. No maps, no itinerary. Just away." He didn't answer right away, just tilted his head, as if weighing whether to press further. "I needed to get out of the noise," she added. "Big city, bigger expectations. Everyone wanted something. I forgot what it felt like to want nothing." Thomas exhaled through his nose, the sound close to a chuckle. "Yeah," he said. "That sounds familiar." Vanessa looked over at him, surprised. "You've done it?" "Sort of," he shrugged. "Not by choice at first. When Lily's mom passed, we had to start over. Sold the house, left the neighborhood. We hit the road, not knowing where we were going. Just knew we couldn't stay where the memories were." Vanessa's expression shifted, something soft, almost reverent. "I'm sorry," she said. "Me too," Thomas replied quietly. "But sometimes, getting lost is the only way you remember what matters." They sat there for another long moment, both watching Lily chase a wind-blown napkin across the parking lot, her laughter echoing against the quiet. Vanessa smiled. "Then, I guess I'm exactly where I need to be." The stars had finally broken through, scattered across the sky like someone had shaken a jar of light over the dark. The last of the clouds had drifted away, and the night turned crisp and still. Vanessa stood near the edge of the picnic table, her mug now empty, the blanket around her shoulders fluttering lightly in the breeze. Thomas packed away the stove, folding it with practiced ease and sliding it back into its case. The silence between them had grown comfortable, anchored by shared words, warm food, and the quiet rhythm of understanding. "I should let you two get some rest," Vanessa said, her voice soft, almost reluctant. Lily, now curled up in the back seat of the van with her stuffed bear clutched to her chest, looked up sleepily. "You can stay if you want," she mumbled, voice thick with yawn. "You don't look like you smile a lot." Vanessa blinked, caught off guard, then smiled. It was small and a little sad, but genuine. "You might be right," Thomas chuckled, though the sound was quieter than usual. He met Vanessa's gaze across the open space. "Thanks for the salt. And the company." She gave a little nod. "Thanks for dinner." With that, she turned and made her way back toward the RV. Her steps were slow, not from weariness, but from something heavier, something that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with how warm this moment had felt. Thomas watched her go, the soft glow of the RV's lights swallowing her up as she stepped inside and gently closed the door. The lot dimmed a bit without her there. He shut the van door quietly and climbed into the front seat. Lily stirred in the back. "She's nice," she murmured, "but she's lonely." Thomas stared out the windshield toward the RV. The silhouette of Vanessa passed briefly behind the window, then vanished again into shadow. "Yeah," he said quietly, reaching back to adjust Lily's blanket. "She is." He didn't say anything more. Just leaned back in his seat, eyes on the stars above, wondering why a stranger's sadness had started to feel like something he recognized. The sun had barely crested the trees when the smell of coffee drifted across the rest stoprick, earthy and unmistakable. Morning light spilled gently over the lot, warming the edges of the gravel and catching dew on the picnic table. Thomas stirred in the front seat of the van, blinking against the pale gold brightness. Lily was still curled up in the back, buried beneath her jacket like a cocoon. The world was quiet, save for the distant hum of passing cars and the hiss of a kettle just beginning to boil. Thomas rubbed the sleep from his eyes and stepped out into the crisp morning air. That's when he saw her. Vanessa stood outside her RV, blanket gone, replaced by a soft gray sweater and jeans. She looked less like a mystery this morning and more like someone trying to blend in with a world she didn't quite belong to. In her hands was a sleek stainless steel thermos and 2 enamel mugs. "Coffee?" she called over, lifting the thermos slightly. Thomas hesitated, then crossed the short distance between them. "You're just trying to pay me back for the mac and cheese." Vanessa grinned. "Guilty, but this might taste better." She poured the coffee, the steam curling into the morning air. He took the mug, nodding in appreciation after his first sip. It was strong, smooth, not the kind of stuff you'd expect at a rest stop. They stood there a moment, side by side in companionable silence. "So," Vanessa said, finally, eyes on the horizon, "where are you two headed?" Thomas took another sip, buying himself time. "Not sure yet. Been heading west. Got a buddy in Colorado who said he might have work, or maybe we just keep driving." She nodded like she understood. "Sometimes moving feels easier than stopping." Thomas glanced at her, curious. "What about you? Always been on the road?" Vanessa paused. "Not always. I had a life somewhere else. Lots of people, lots of noise. I walked away from it." He didn't press. She didn't elaborate. They stood there with their secrets, warm mugs between their palms, both pretending not to notice how comfortable the quiet between them had become. The RV rumbled to life, just after 9, its engine breaking the stillness like a low, reluctant sigh. Vanessa had said a quick goodbye, nothing dramatic, just a gentle wave to Thomas and a sleepy nod to Lily, who was munching quietly on a granola bar in the van's back seat. Thomas offered a polite half-smile and lifted his coffee in parting. No promises, no see-you-laters. Just the quiet understanding that most people pass through. That's what this place was, a stop, not a destination. Vanessa pulled onto the highway, merging into the slow lane as the trees began to blur beside her. The RV was warm. The air scented faintly with cedar and roast coffee, but she couldn't shake the cold that had settled in her chest. She told herself it made sense to leave. She had no reason to stay, no connection to the man with the tired eyes and steady hands. No ties to the little girl who had offered her a seat like it was the most natural thing in the world. But 3 miles down the road, she eased her foot off the gas. She could still see them, Thomas cooking over that little stove, brushing the hair out of Lily's eyes, serving up a dinner that tasted like kindness. She could still feel the honesty in their silence. The way her name had sounded when Lily said it, not like it belonged to a woman on magazine covers, but like it belonged to someone who mattered for real reasons. The highway stretched ahead, long and lonely. A straight shot to more miles, more quiet nights in more empty places. Vanessa slowed, turned on her signal, and pulled onto the shoulder. Her hands hovered over the wheel, unsure. She could keep going. That would be easier. Cleaner. Safer. But instead, she turned the RV around. No fanfare. No music swelling dramatically. Just the hum of rubber on asphalt, and the steady pull of something that didn't quite make sense but felt right anyway. She didn't know what she'd say when she got back. Maybe she wouldn't say anything at all, but for the first time in months, she wanted to be somewhere with someone not just passing through. The RV's back right tire gave out with a low, muffled thump thump thump, just as Vanessa re-entered the rest stop lot. The steering wheel tugged gently in her hands, and the vehicle groaned its discontent as she coasted to a stop on the gravel. She sat there for a second, gripping the wheel, forehead resting against the heel of her hand. Of course, the tire would go. She'd just turned around, made the one choice she hadn't been making for months, and now she was paying for it with a flat and a bruised ego. She exhaled, pulled the parking brake, and climbed out. Thomas had noticed the RV returning. He'd been reorganizing the minivan's back hatch, trying to find Lily's missing sock when he heard the noise. By the time Vanessa stepped out, frustration plain on her face, he was already walking over. "Trouble?" he asked, his tone light, casual. Not mocking, just offering. She looked over at him, lips pressed into a tight line. "Apparently I made a wrong turn back to you, and fate decided to punish me with a tire that hates me." Thomas crouched beside the RV, eyes scanning the damage. "It's not too bad, just flat, not shredded." She raised an eyebrow. "You can tell the difference by looking?" "I can tell the difference by the way it sounds," he said, standing again and dusting his hands off. "Pop the storage hatch. You got a jack?" Vanessa blinked. "I think so, probably." He gave her a quick smile. "Go ahead and check. I'll make it work." Within minutes, Thomas was flat on his back beneath the RV, sleeves rolled to his elbows, working with steady hands. Vanessa hovered awkwardly nearby, hands stuffed in her sweater pockets. "You do this often?" she asked. "Flat tires?" he said, voice muffled. "Enough times to stop counting. Big rigs, sedans, old farm trucks, they're all just nuts and bolts." She watched him, how methodical he was, how calm. No showing off, no complaints, no need to be thanked. Just fixing what needed fixing. "You're not used to people doing things for you, are you?" he added after a beat. Vanessa stiffened, caught off guard. "No, I guess I'm not." Thomas didn't say anything else. He just kept working. And, for the first time, in a long time, Vanessa let someone help without negotiation, without conditions. Just trust. By the time Thomas tightened the last lug nut and lowered the jack, the morning sun had warmed the pavement enough that the chill had faded from the air. Vanessa stood nearby, one foot tapping lightly, her arms crossed, but her posture had softened. She wasn't pacing or checking her phone. She wasn't even pretending to be busy. She was watching him. "Good as new," Thomas said, rising and brushing dust from his jeans. "Though you might want to have the rest of your tires checked before too long. These look like they've seen better miles." Vanessa offered a sheepish smile. "Probably a fair assessment of most things in my life right now." He chuckled at that, then stepped back to give her space to inspect the job herself. Not that she could tell. She wasn't the type to second-guess a man who'd just fixed something without asking for anything in return. Lily ran up from the van, her arms wrapped around a ragged picture book. "Did you fix it, Dad?" "Good as new," he said again, crouching to ruffle her hair. Vanessa watched them watch that, the quiet bond, the small affirmations, the easy way Lily's hand found Thomas's without even thinking. It stirred something deep and unsteady in her, something that made her speak before logic could catch up. "Hey," she said, voice a little higher than usual. "There's a scenic overlook a few miles up the road. It's on a bluff, nice view, picnic tables. Kind of a hidden gem. I was planning to stop for lunch." Thomas looked at her, one brow raised. She cleared her throat and added, "I've got food, real food, stuff that doesn't come from a cooler." Lily's face lit up instantly. "Can we, Dad? Please?" Thomas hesitated, glancing at the van, then back to Vanessa. "You sure?" She nodded. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't mean it, and I wouldn't mind the company." He held her gaze for a second longer, reading the sincerity in her voice, then looked at Lily. "All right," he said. "Lunch with a view." Vanessa smiled, small but real. For once, she wasn't running. She was inviting someone in. The inside of the RV was nothing like Thomas expected. Lily gasped the second she stepped in, her boots thumping softly against the polished floor. "Whoa," she whispered, spinning slowly as her eyes drank in the glossy white cabinets, recessed lighting, and soft leather seating that wrapped around a built-in dining nook. Vanessa smiled, watching her take it all in like it was a castle on wheels. "You can sit wherever you like," she said, motioning toward the couch. "Just mind the step by the kitchen. I always forget and stub my toe." Thomas followed, slower, ducking slightly as he stepped through the door. His gaze moved across the space with quiet calculation, like a man trying to catalog every luxury without appearing impressed. The RV was spotless, elegant, and stocked. It didn't look like a wanderer's home. It looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. "This is nice," he said, carefully neutral. Vanessa laughed under her breath as she moved toward the small kitchen. "You can say ridiculously over the top. I won't be offended." He just gave a tight smile and slid into the booth beside Lily, who was already running her fingers across the touchscreen controls by the window. "Do these buttons make the bed come out of the wall?" she asked excitedly. "Yep, that one controls the lights too." "Just don't hit the retract awning button unless you want me yelling," Vanessa replied. Thomas watched her as she rummaged through cabinets, pulling out ingredients with a kind of stiff awkwardness. She was clearly out of practice. She dropped a wooden spoon, opened the fridge 3 times looking for something she'd already grabbed, and stared at a package of pasta like it was written in another language. Still, she pressed on. "I used to cook," she said, half to herself, "before work got big, before everything got so scheduled." The water finally boiled. She tossed in the pasta, then turned to slice tomatoes with careful precision, occasionally glancing back at Thomas and Lily. Thomas leaned back, arms crossed. "You're braver than most, letting strangers into your home and trying to cook." Vanessa gave him a look. "You fixed my tire and gave me questionable mac and cheese. I owe you something edible." He smirked, just slightly. "Fair. It wasn't a perfect meal. The noodles were slightly overdone, the tomatoes uneven, and the dressing she made for the salad was more tang than taste. But when she set the plates down in front of them, hands trembling just a little, there was something else on the table, something warmer than the food itself. Care, effort, a gesture that didn't need to be perfect to be real. And that, Thomas noted, was worth more than any 5-star meal. The RV quieted after lunch, the clatter of forks replaced by soft murmurs, and the occasional giggle from Lily as she discovered more hidden buttons and compartments. Vanessa moved to the small kitchenette, rinsing plates beneath the steady stream of warm water, her back to Thomas and Lily. But her mind was far away, slipping sideways into memory. Pulled back by the unexpected warmth of a paper napkin stained with tomato dressing and laughter she hadn't expected to hear today. She'd grown up in a house full of rooms, not people. Her parents traveled more than they stayed, and when they were home, they spoke in clipped tones about numbers, image, and expectations. The help raised her nannies with rotating names, tutors who handed out worksheets like vending machines. She remembered sitting alone at a marble countertop, eating pre-packaged meals while the city lights blinked through floor-to-ceiling windows. Lonely wasn't the right word. It had been emptier than that. Like she existed in a vacuum, untouched and untouched by anything real. Business had become her way out. Not just of her family's cold orbit, but of powerlessness. She was sharp, driven, unflinching. By 28, she was everywhere: magazine covers, keynote stages, Forbes lists. People clapped when she walked into rooms. They handed her $1-million contracts like party favors. And she told herself that was enough. Until Darren, the first person who hadn't seemed impressed by her title, who took her to dive bars instead of rooftop lounges, who promised honesty and built her trust one long conversation at a time until he tore it all down with a deal behind her back. Not just betrayal, but humiliation. She'd let him close, too close. And he'd taught her that even the people who said they saw her could be lying. The day she left, she didn't pack much, just the basics and enough cash to disappear. The RV had been an impulse freedom on 4 wheels. A way to keep moving so nothing could catch her. Until now. She looked over her shoulder, watching Thomas quietly explain something to Lily, his voice low, steady. Their bond was unshakable. Built on something real, something she'd never had, something she didn't trust herself to want. But here she was, still here, still watching, still wondering. The afternoon sun slanted low, filtering through the RV windows in warm, drowsy light. Lily had finally worn herself out exploring, and had curled up on the couch with her book, her head nestled into the throw pillow like she belonged there. Her boots lay on the floor, one on its side, and her tiny socked feet twitched now and then as she read. Thomas sat at the booth again, sipping from the same enamel mug Vanessa had filled hours earlier, now topped off with tea. Across from him, Vanessa had finally stopped moving. She sat with one leg folded beneath her, hands wrapped around her own mug, her posture relaxed in a way that said she'd momentarily forgotten how to guard herself. They hadn't said much since lunch. Not out of awkwardness, but something more, deliberate. The kind of silence that didn't need filling. Thomas glanced toward the couch, then back to Vanessa. "She's taken to you," he said. Vanessa smiled softly. "She's easy to love." He nodded. "She is." For a moment, neither of them looked at each other. They just stared out the window, watching a leaf drift slowly across the windshield. "Were you close with your parents?" Thomas asked after a beat, not pushing, just curious. Vanessa let out a quiet breath. "Not really. They were distant, good at expectations, bad at affection." He nodded again, not surprised. "Mine were the opposite, loud and messy. Everything boiled down to love or frustration, usually both at once." "Sounds better," she said. "Sometimes." Another quiet settled in. Vanessa turned her mug slowly in her hands. "You talk about Lily's mom much?" Thomas didn't look up, but his fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "Not often. When Lily asks, I tell her the truth. That her mom was kind, beautiful, too good for this world." Vanessa swallowed, then said, "I'm sorry." He finally looked at her. "So am I." There was no follow-up, no long explanation, no digging. Just the soft weight of two people recognizing something in the other, the echo of loss, the fatigue of surviving it, the gentleness that came from carrying it without bitterness. Vanessa didn't offer comfort, and Thomas didn't need it. What they gave each other in that moment was something quieter, understanding, and the fragile beginnings of trust. The rain came suddenly, as it often did in places forgotten by the radar. One minute the sky was a hazy gray, and the next, fat drops were drumming against the RV's roof in a steady rhythm. Thunder rumbled somewhere distant, low and lazy, like it couldn't quite be bothered to roar. They had planned to leave. Or at least, that was the unspoken agreement. But the storm pinned them down, and neither seemed in any rush to test the road. Vanessa pulled out a folding camp chair and dragged it beneath the RV's awning, the rain tapping its metal like a metronome. She'd wrapped herself in a worn sweatshirt and held a chipped mug of something warm and vaguely herbal. Thomas joined her a few minutes later, jacket zipped to his chin, hands in his pockets. Lily had fallen asleep in the van, worn out from the day and bundled in blankets. They sat side by side, legs stretched out, the smell of wet earth and pine settling between them. The fire pit nearby crackled softly, a small flame shielded under a makeshift canopy of sticks and tarp Thomas's doing, of course. "Rain makes everything slower," Vanessa murmured. "Even time." "Sometimes that's a good thing," Thomas replied, not looking at her. "For people who don't know what comes next." She smiled faintly, sipping her tea. "You always talk like someone who's carrying more than he lets on," he shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I've just been quiet long enough to see things clearly." The fire popped. Sparks spiraled up and disappeared into the dark. "I used to think success would feel like freedom," Vanessa said, voice low. "I chased it so hard, built everything I was on it. But the higher I climbed, the lonelier it got. Like I was building a house on glass." Thomas finally looked at her. His eyes weren't surprised. They were calm, steady like he already knew. "You ever miss it?" he asked. She considered. "Sometimes. Not the people, not the noise, but the certainty, the illusion of control." He nodded. "Yeah, I miss that too." They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full. Full of things unsaid but felt. The rain kept falling, a curtain around their little campfire world. And for the first time, both of them let their shoulders relax. Not all the way. Not yet. But enough. Enough to begin. The rain lingered through the night, softening by morning into a gentle drizzle that clung to the windows and left the world damp and still. The air was thick with the scent of wet pine and wood smoke, and the rest stop felt like an island quiet, slow, wrapped in gray. Inside the RV, warmth pulsed from the small heater, and the soft sound of laughter filled the space. Lily sat cross-legged at the table, tongue poking out in concentration, a sheet of printer paper in her hands. Vanessa sat beside her, sleeves rolled to her elbows, mimicking each fold with exaggerated care. "Okay, Vanessa said, holding up her own creation. Now we fold the wings down like this. Lily mirrored the move, her eyes wide with focus. Like this? Perfect, Vanessa said, a little surprised at the pride she felt swelling in her chest. You're a natural. Thomas leaned against the doorframe, one hand cradling a steaming mug of coffee, watching them with an unreadable expression. Something close to amusement. Something close to wonder. The table was scattered with a few failed attempts, crumpled corners, uneven wings, but two completed planes now sat proudly side by side. Lily's had pink marker streaks on the wings and the word Flyer Queen scribbled on the side. Vanessa's was crisp, minimalist, sleek. You ready for the maiden flight? Vanessa asked. Lily grinned. You first. Vanessa stood, stepping back with dramatic flair, and tossed her plane through the air. It glided smoothly across the RV, before bouncing off the couch and landing on the floor. Lily cheered like it had broken a world record. Thomas shook his head, chuckling. You've created a monster. I like her monster, Vanessa said softly, meeting his eyes for a brief, honest second. Before anything more could be said, Lily clapped her hands. Now pancakes. Vanessa blinked. Wait, pancakes? You promised last night, Lily said, crossing her arms in mock seriousness. I said maybe, Vanessa corrected. She heard yes, Thomas added with a shrug. Vanessa sighed, reaching for the flower. Fine. But you're both flipping your own. An hour later, the RV smelled like vanilla, syrup, and something dangerously close to joy. And as she watched Lily smear butter across a too-thick pancake with utter delight, Vanessa realized how strangely natural it all felt, like she was part of something she hadn't known she'd missed. The rain had passed by late morning, leaving behind puddles that mirrored the sky and air that smelled like wet asphalt and pine. They'd packed up slowly, reluctant to move on, but knowing they couldn't linger forever. The RV needed gas. So did the minivan. So they stopped at a rural station just off the two-lane highway, the kind of place where the coffee was burnt, the bathrooms questionable, and the newsstand dusty and thin. Thomas sent Lily inside with a $5 bill and instructions for juice and a snack. He leaned against the hood of the van, the pump clicking rhythmically as it filled the tank. Vanessa was parked beside him, head bent over her phone, finally catching up on messages she'd been ignoring. The bell above the convenience store door jingled, and Thomas stepped inside to check on Lily. That's when he saw it. The magazine was tucked beside a row of auto weeklies and tabloids, its headline bold against the faded reds and yellows of the rack. Vanessa Lane, billionaire VC queen, disappears from spotlight. Where did she go? Her face was angled perfectly, eyes confident, jaw set, hair glossy, and styled within an inch of perfection. It was her. But not the woman flipping pancakes in a sweatshirt. Not the one teaching Lily to fold paper wings. He stared at it for a long moment. Lily tugged at his sleeve, holding a bag of pretzels and a juice box. Can we get gummy worms too? Thomas blinked. Yeah, sure, kiddo. Go ahead. He grabbed the magazine, almost without thinking, and folded it under his arm. He didn't know why, maybe curiosity, maybe clarity, maybe a need to see the version of her the world thought they knew. Back outside, Vanessa looked up as he approached. Everything okay? Yeah, Thomas said, handing Lily her snacks. He met Vanessa's eyes briefly, the magazine still tucked at his side. He didn't mention it. Not yet. But something had shifted. Not anger. Not disappointment. Just a sudden awareness. The woman sitting in the RV wasn't just someone who'd run from her life. She'd built one first. And the whole world had been watching. The sun dipped low by the time they parked at another quiet rest stop, this one nestled against a low ridge of pines and boulders, the sky streaked in soft gold. Lily had fallen asleep in the van, a half-empty juice box still cradled in her lap, head tilted against the window. Thomas didn't wake her. Instead, he walked slowly to the RV. The magazine rolled in his hand like a reluctant question. Vanessa was inside, seated at the table, laptop open but untouched. She looked up when the door opened, and her smile faltered the moment she saw the expression on his face. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and placed the magazine on the table. Her face on the cover stared up at her, perfect, polished, poised. A version of herself she hadn't seen in months, and one she had no desire to return to. Thomas stood with his hands in his pockets, saying nothing at first. Vanessa stared at the glossy page, then sighed, pushing it gently aside. I wondered when this moment would come. You could have said something, Thomas said, not cold, just quiet. I know, she replied. I almost did. 12 times. But every time I started, I imagined how it would change everything. He nodded once, slowly. It does. Vanessa looked out the window. The trees rustled faintly in the wind, and the sky deepened into twilight. I spent years being that woman, she said. The one in the article. Always moving, always building, always proving something. To who? He asked. To everyone, she said. To my parents, to the investors, to myself. I didn't stop until I woke up one morning, in my own penthouse, and realized I hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, just emails, meetings, people smiling while they calculated what they could get from me. Thomas watched her, his jaw tight but his eyes softer now. I wasn't running from fame, she continued. I was running from being a product, a paycheck. I didn't want to be seen as a brand anymore. I just wanted to be. She turned back to him. You and Lily. You never looked at me like I was worth something because of what I have. That's why I stayed. Silence settled between them again, heavier than before, but not sharp. Not accusing, just real. Thomas exhaled slowly. I don't care about the articles, or your bank account, but I do care about the truth. Vanessa nodded. You have it, all of it. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. For the first time, they were on level ground. No titles, no secrets. Just two people, carrying the weight of who they'd been, and deciding what came next. The next morning was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that settles after something has shifted, even if no one says it out loud. The air between them wasn't cold exactly, but it had thinned, like a window left open just enough for doubt to drift in. Thomas packed the van slowly, methodically, checking straps twice and reorganizing bins that didn't need reorganizing. Lily bounced around as usual, completely unaware of the tension. She chattered about the squirrels she'd spotted near the trees and asked if they could make paper airplanes again later. Vanessa smiled and nodded, but her eyes kept drifting to Thomas. He hadn't really looked at her since the magazine. Not the way he had before. Not with that open steadiness that made her feel like she could breathe again. He was polite still, helpful still. But there was a new distance in his posture, in the way he answered her with short phrases and averted glances. A quiet wall had gone up, and she felt every brick. When she offered him coffee that morning, he took it with a quiet thanks and nothing more. She wanted to ask what he was thinking, wanted to push past the silence and just name it for what it was. But part of her was afraid of the answer, because the truth she had given him, the part of herself she'd buried for so long, might have been too much, or maybe just the wrong kind of truth. She stood by the RV steps, watching as Thomas tied down the last of the gear in the van. His movements were precise, focused, like the act of doing was safer than talking. Thomas, she said quietly, trying. He paused but didn't turn around. Yeah? She hesitated. You okay? He finally looked over his shoulder. His eyes weren't hard, just tired. Guarded. Yeah. Just a lot on my mind. She nodded, even though the answer hurt. Me too. The silence returned, settling between them like a fog. Not hostile, just uncertain. They stood in it, each unsure whether to take a step forward or turn away. And for now, neither did. The rest stop they chose that evening was quiet and sun-dappled, tucked beside a stand of pine trees that caught the golden light just right. It was the kind of place you'd never remember on a map, but Lily would later remember it as magic. She didn't know anyone had remembered. Thomas had, of course. He always did. But this year, he hadn't planned anything. No balloons, no party. Just a promise of pancakes in the morning and maybe a roadside gift if they passed a dollar store. That was all he could manage. And she never asked for more, which was why the sight waiting for her beside the RV took them both by surprise. Streamer soft pastel, one shung gently between two trees, taped carefully to branches with surgical precision. A little folding table had been set up beneath them, draped in a floral bedsheet that had clearly been repurposed as a tablecloth. At its center sat a small cake, homemade, a little lopsided, but glowing with 5 uneven candles plus 3 more, jammed in for good measure. "Happy birthday, Lily," Vanessa said softly, stepping out from behind the RV, hands still dusted with powdered sugar. Lily gasped, eyes wide. "Is that for me?" Vanessa smiled, kneeling down to her height. "It is. I wasn't sure what kind of cake you liked, so I guessed. There's vanilla and sprinkles, and way too much frosting." Thomas stood frozen, a duffel bag still in his hands. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched the scene unfold. Lily rushed forward and threw her arms around Vanessa with the abandon only a child could give. "This is the best surprise ever." "I'm glad," Vanessa said, holding her gently. "You deserve a real birthday." Thomas stepped forward finally, setting the bag down by the van. "You didn't have to do all this," he said quietly. Vanessa met his gaze, a flicker of emotion passing behind her eyes. "I wanted to. It felt important." He didn't answer, but something inside him shifted. As Lily danced around the table, blowing out candles and begging for the biggest slice, Thomas saw it clearly not the version of Vanessa from the magazine, but the one who'd stayed, who'd paid attention, who cared enough to make something by hand just to make a little girl feel seen. And for the first time in days, the wall inside him cracked, just a little. Enough to let the warmth in. The fire crackled low, sending tiny sparks into the darkening sky. Lily had fallen asleep inside the van, still clutching a napkin-stained paper plate and a half-eaten slice of cake. Her head rested against a pile of blankets, sugar-fueled excitement finally giving way to the peaceful sleep of a child who knew she was loved. Thomas sat beside the fire pit, knees drawn up, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm tea. Across from him, Vanessa mirrored his posture, her legs tucked beneath her and her eyes fixed on the flames. The tension that had lingered between them the past few days was thinner now, softer around the edges, like snow beginning to melt. "Thank you," Thomas said, voice low, rough. "For today, for what you did for her." Vanessa didn't look up right away. It felt good to do something that didn't come from a calendar alert or a corporate event planner. Thomas smiled faintly. "Well, you nailed it. She won't stop talking about the frosting." Vanessa chuckled. "I think I overdid the sugar." "You did," he said. It was perfect. They sat in silence for a long moment, the kind that carried weight but didn't press too hard, the kind that asked for truth without demanding it. "She's all I've got," Thomas said finally. "After her mom passed, it was like the world shrank to just the two of us. Nothing made sense anymore, except keeping Lily safe, keeping her okay." Vanessa looked at him then, really looked. "I know what that's like," she said. "Not the same way, but grief makes everything sharper, quieter, like the volume gets turned down on everything else." He nodded. "You carry it differently than most people." "So do you." She drew a breath. "I lost someone too. Not to death just. Lost them when I realized they never really saw me. I think that broke something in me for a while. Made me forget how to let people in." Thomas studied her, the firelight flickering in her eyes. "And now? I'm remembering." He didn't answer, but his silence was no longer closed, no longer distant. When their eyes met again, there was something else there. Not resolution, not certainty, but the quiet, unmistakable beginning of trust. The ice was breaking, and beneath it, something warmer waited. The next morning broke with pale light and crisp air, the sky still shaking off the last of its clouds. Vanessa stood outside the RV, sipping hot coffee from her favorite mug, the one with a chip in the handle and faded gold lettering that read, "Stay Wild." She wrapped her sweater tighter around herself and watched the world stretch awake. Thomas was already up as usual. She'd learned that about him. He never wasted a sunrise. He was checking the van's oil when a rattling sound echoed from the highway entrance. A small sedan sputtered into the rest stop, its hood bouncing slightly with each bump, engine coughing like it had a smoker's lungs and a bad attitude. The driver, a man in his 50s with a worried expression and a phone clutched in his hand, pulled in beside the picnic area and popped the hood with a groan. Thomas looked over once, then without a word, grabbed his toolkit. Vanessa followed at a distance, mug still warm in her hands. "Need a hand?" Thomas called out. The man looked up, startled, then nodded with a sheepish smile. "Yeah, I think it's overheating. I was hoping to make it another 10 miles, but she gave out." Thomas was already crouching beside the engine. "Looks like a busted hose clamp," he muttered. "I've got something that'll hold you till you get to a real shop." The man blinked. "You a mechanic?" Thomas shrugged. "Just a dad who's fixed a lot of broken things." Vanessa stood back, watching them. There was no performance in Thomas's voice, no need for praise. He didn't talk down to the man, didn't boast. Just got to work with quiet confidence, sleeves rolled, hands steady, voice calm. Lily wandered over, with a juice box in hand, settling next to Vanessa like it was the most normal thing in the world. "He does this all the time," Lily whispered. "Helps people without thinking about it." Vanessa smiled, eyes still on Thomas. "I can see that." It struck her then, not just the goodness of him, but the ease of it. There was no image to manage here. No boardroom, no PR. Just a man who showed up, again and again, for the people around him. Not because it looked good, but because it was good. And in that moment, watching Thomas wipe grease from his hands with a frayed rag, Vanessa felt a pang of longing she hadn't expected. Not for the life she'd left, but for the one she'd never known she wanted. The rest stop had gone quiet again. The traveler with the overheating sedan had driven off, waving his thanks, and Lily was busy building a pinecone village under a nearby tree, narrating each citizen with dramatic flair. Thomas had gone to refill their water jugs, leaving Vanessa alone at the picnic table, her half-finished coffee cooling beside her. That was when her phone buzzed once, twice, then again, persistent and sharp, against the peaceful silence. She glanced down and felt her stomach tighten. Martin Reyes, chairman of the board. A name she hadn't seen on her screen since she left without a word. For a moment, she thought about letting it go to voicemail. Pretending the signal was bad. Pretending she wasn't here at all. But the guilt crept in like a draft under the door. She stood and stepped away, walking toward the edge of the lot. Where the trees grew thicker and the air felt heavier, she answered. "Vanessa." Martin's voice was clipped, all business, as always. "You're alive. That's good to know." "I'm fine, Martin," she said, keeping her voice level. "What's going on?" "You tell me. You disappeared. No one's seen you in months. You ghosted the board, canceled every meeting, and didn't tell your assistant where you were going." "That was the point," she replied. "Well, now the press is asking questions. Shareholders are nervous. We've got speculation from every angle: burnout, breakdown, secret buyout. People are starting to worry you're not coming back." Vanessa exhaled slowly. "Maybe I'm not." There was a pause. "That's not funny." It wasn't a joke. Another silence, longer this time. Then Martin's tone shifted, less sharp, more urgent. "Vanessa, you built this company. People believe in you. We've kept things stable, but it's not sustainable. You know that. We need you back. Even just to make a statement." She closed her eyes. The trees whispered overhead. Somewhere behind her, she could hear Lily's laughter, light and free. "I need time," Vanessa said. "I need space. I need to figure out who I am without all of that." "You don't have time," Martin said. "We're calling a board meeting next week. You should be in that seat, not on some personal journey in the woods." Vanessa didn't answer. "You're running out of room to hide, Vanessa." When the call ended, she stood there, phone heavy in her hand, heart heavier still. For the first time in weeks, the world she'd left behind wasn't distant anymore. It had found her, and it wanted her back. The sun had dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the rest stop. The light turned amber, warm and fleeting, like the end of something beautiful you didn't want to let go of. Vanessa stood near the RV, arms folded, leaning against the side like it was the only thing holding her up. Her phone was tucked away, but the weight of the call still pressed on her shoulders like a second gravity. Thomas sat at the picnic table, drying out Lily's damp socks near the fire pit. She was inside the van now, humming to herself, drawing with her markers, blissfully unaware that the air around the grown-ups had changed. Vanessa watched him for a long moment before finally speaking. "You ever think about leaving all of this behind?" she asked. Thomas didn't look up. "You mean the glamorous world of gas stations and soggy socks?" She smiled, but only briefly. "I mean, really leaving. Starting over. Somewhere that doesn't come with limits. Somewhere that isn't always scraping by." Now he looked at her. Slowly, steadily. "What are you saying?" Vanessa stepped forward, nervous in a way that felt unfamiliar. "I've got money. Too much of it, probably. I've got connections, land, ideas, things I never wanted to do alone. I'm not asking you to fix anything for me, Thomas. I'm asking if you'd consider building something with me." He said nothing, just studied her with the same quiet eyes that had seen through the polished version of her from the very beginning. "I know it's fast," she added quickly. "I know you don't trust easily. I wouldn't either. But I've seen the way you live, the way you care. You're exactly the kind of person the world needs more of, and if I'm going to go back to it, I want to do it on my terms. With people who matter." Thomas stood, brushing his hands on his jeans, the fire casting flickers of gold along his jawline. "You're talking about two different worlds," he said. "You don't just stitch them together." "I'm not asking for stitches," Vanessa said softly. "I'm asking for a chance." He looked away for a moment, toward the van where Lily's laughter floated out, small and unburdened. Then he looked back at Vanessa and said nothing. Not yet. The fire had burned low, down to glowing embers and soft crackles. The stars were out now, scattered thick across the sky like spilled sugar. Thomas stood with his hands deep in his jacket pockets, the night pressing in around him, colder than the one before. Vanessa waited across from him, still near the RV, her expression calm but expectant. He wanted to say yes, he really did. But instead, he took a breath and shook his head. "I can't," he said quietly. Vanessa's eyes searched his face. "Because you don't trust me?" "No," he said, and his voice was steady. "Because I don't trust what it would cost." She flinched at that, just slightly. "I've spent the last few years holding things together with duct tape and hope," he continued. "Every choice I make, I ask myself if it keeps Lily safe, if it keeps her stable. I can't throw her life into something unproven because it sounds good in the moment." "I'm not offering a fantasy, Thomas," Vanessa said. "This isn't some fairy tale ending. It's real. I'm real. And I'm asking you—" "I'm not a project," he interrupted, his voice firmer now. "And I'm not a man you scoop up because you feel something you didn't expect to feel." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You think that's what this is? Charity?" "I think it's complicated," he replied. "And maybe too fast for someone like me to trust." He looked down at his hands, calloused and rough, then toward the van where Lily slept soundly, her small world folded into the back seat. "She's already lost one parent," he said. "I can't afford to lose what little footing we have chasing something that might not stick." Vanessa nodded slowly, blinking hard. "I get it. I do." The space between them stretched wide, not angry, not bitter, just full of everything they weren't ready to carry together. "I'm not saying goodbye," she said finally. Thomas nodded. "I'm not either, But he stepped back, into the quiet, into the safety of what he knew. Because for men like him, dignity sometimes looked a lot like walking away from something they wanted just to protect the thing they couldn't risk losing. The morning was quiet in that heavy, final kind of way, where even the birds seemed to sing softer, as if they sensed something was ending. Vanessa stood beside the RV, her bag slung over one shoulder, the keys in her hand trembling slightly. The sun filtered through the trees, casting long slashes of gold across the pavement, painting shadows that felt more like borders than light. Thomas was helping Lily tie her shoes by the van, trying to keep his voice cheerful, trying not to look toward the woman who had, in such a short time, felt like a piece of something lost and suddenly found again. Vanessa didn't want to go. Every fiber of her body screamed to stay, to fight harder, to find some other way to make this work. But the space between what she could offer and what he could accept was too wide. She'd seen it in his eyes, the hesitation, the fear, the unspoken vow that he couldn't risk letting Lily's world tilt again. Not even for something that felt like love. She took a breath, then crossed the lot slowly. "I'm heading out," she said. Voice too even, too controlled. Thomas looked up and met her gaze, nodding once. "Drive safe." There was a long pause. Then Lily looked up, brow furrowed, confusion settling in as she scanned their faces. "You're leaving?" she asked, stepping forward. "Why?" Vanessa crouched to meet her. "Because sometimes grown-ups don't always know how to stay, even when they want to." Lily's lower lip quivered. "But we're supposed to have pancakes again." "I know, sweetheart." Vanessa smiled, but her voice cracked. "I wish we could." Lily's arms wrapped around her neck in an instant, tight, desperate. "Can't you just come with us? Or we go with you? We could be together." Vanessa closed her eyes, holding her close. Her voice was a whisper. "I want that so much." Thomas stood frozen, watching his daughter cry into Vanessa's shoulder, and though his heart clenched, he didn't stop her. He couldn't. Vanessa kissed Lily's forehead, then gently pulled away. "Goodbye, baby girl." Lily cried as the RV pulled out, waving through her tears. And Thomas stood beside her, silent, hand on her shoulder, trying not to cry himself. But deep down he knew she had taken something with her, and left something behind. The days that followed fell into quiet, predictable rhythm. Wake up, make coffee, pack the van, fix what was broken, drive, sleep, repeat. Thomas returned to the road like a man slipping into an old coat familiar, worn, a little too tight in the shoulders. He and Lily moved from one rest stop to another, one small town to the next. He picked up odd jobs, brake pads, oil changes, a busted water pump on a tractor outside of Tulsa. Enough to keep gas in the tank and food in their cooler. Enough to get by. But something had changed. The silence was heavier now, not from grief, but from absence. Vanessa didn't come up in conversation, not even once. He didn't tell Lily to forget. He didn't tell her anything at all. But when she mentioned the RVer voice dipped, softer, careful, like she wasn't sure if saying the name out loud would make her dad sad. It would have. Thomas would wake some mornings before the sun rose, sitting on the edge of the van's front seat, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring at nothing in particular. He'd watch the horizon like it might hand him an answer he didn't have the courage to ask for. Vanessa was everywhere and nowhere. In the way Lily hummed when she colored. In the folded paper airplane still tucked into the glove box. In the sweetness of syrup when Thomas made pancakes one morning out of guilt more than celebration. He told himself he'd made the right choice. That stability mattered more than dreams. That protecting Lily was his purpose, and anything that threatened that, no matter how kind or beautiful, wasn't worth the risk. But at night, when Lily was asleep and the world was still, Thomas would sometimes pull over on a quiet stretch of highway, turn off the engine, and stare into the dark. And he'd wonder not loudly, not with regret, but with quiet HF, letting her go, had been an act of love or of fear. Either way, she lingered. And so did the space she left behind. It was late afternoon when Thomas pulled the van into the dusty parking lot of a roadside laundromat in a town so small the welcome sign doubled as the goodbye. The sun was high, casting a sleepy amber over everything, and Lily was stretched out in the back seat, drawing shapes into the condensation on the window with her finger. They hadn't planned to stop long. Just laundry, a quick rinse of the dishes, maybe a hot meal if the local diner didn't mind a wriggly 8-year-old and a man who paid in cash. But when Thomas opened the driver's side door, he noticed something tucked into the metal latch of the mailbox beside the laundromat's vending machine. At first, he thought it was junk mail, forgotten or misplaced. But then, he saw his daughter's name, Lily Morgan, written in neat, careful handwriting. No return address, just her name. He pulled it free, turning it over, scanning for any sign of who it was from. But he didn't need to. He knew. "Lily," he said softly, stepping around the van. She looked up, curious. "Yeah? You got a letter." Her eyes lit up as she sat up straight. "Me? Who would send me a letter?" He handed it to her slowly. She tore the top open carefully, like it might be fragile. Inside was a single folded sheet of thick paper, pale blue. On it, drawn in bright crayon strokes, was a paper airplane with little dotted lines trailing behind it like it was soaring. And next to it, in Vanessa's looping script, "Still flying, come find me if you're ready." Lily stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at her dad. Her eyes were wide, soft with hope. "Does this mean we can go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas didn't answer right away. He took the letter gently, held it in his hands, and read the words again. A paper airplane. A challenge. A promise. A door still open. His throat tightened, and all he could manage was a quiet "maybe." But inside, something shifted. Maybe wasn't, no. Maybe was the first word of a new beginning. Thomas sat on the edge of the motel bed, the letter resting beside him like it carried more weight than paper should. The lights were dim, casting soft shadows against the floral wallpaper, and Lily was curled up on the second bed, hugging her stuffed bear and watching him with quiet expectation. He hadn't said much since she read the note. He hadn't needed to. Lily didn't push. But every so often, her gaze drifted to the letter as if it might lift itself and fly them straight to Vanessa's door. The question wasn't if he wanted to go. It was should he. There was work here, barely. The garage paid just enough to keep them in motels and microwave dinners. The minivan was on its last legs, coughing every time they climbed a hill. And the future, if he was being honest, stretched out like more of the same, safe, familiar but painfully small. He'd built walls around them, thinking they were protection. But maybe they'd just been limits. The next morning, he made the first call. By that afternoon, he'd turned in his tools, shaken his boss's hand, and walked out with a final paycheck in his back pocket. He didn't look back. The van sold for less than he'd hoped, but enough. A friend, a scrappy old mechanic who owed him more favors than he could count, lent him a better one. Not pretty, but solid, reliable, big enough to hold the rest of their life, whatever shape it took. Lily helped pack. She didn't ask questions. Just hummed while folding her clothes and tucked the paper airplane drawing into a notebook like it was a map. On the morning they left, Thomas buckled her in, paused with his hand on the ignition, and looked out at the quiet street behind them. The life they'd known, the sacrifices, the grief, the grit. Then he started the engine. They weren't driving toward luxury. Not toward comfort or even certainty. They were driving toward possibility, toward a voice that said, "Come find me." And this time, he didn't let fear answer first. He let hope take the wheel. The tires crunched softly over gravel as Thomas pulled into the familiar curve of the rest, stopped the same one where it had all begun. The trees rustled gently in the early evening breeze, and the golden light filtered through them just like it had that first day. The air smelled like pine and distant wood smoke, and the place, though quiet, felt anything but empty. Lily pressed her face to the window. "It's here," she whispered. "It's the same place." Thomas nodded but didn't speak. His hands stayed firm on the wheel, his heart pounding with the quiet weight of hope laced with doubt. He hadn't called, hadn't written. He wasn't sure if she'd be here. He just came, and then he saw it. Parked beneath the same stand of trees was the RV, unchanged and unmistakable, still sleek, still shining. But now, it looked less like a retreat and more like a home. Vanessa was outside, seated on the picnic bench with a book resting on her knee, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was barefoot, her hair pulled into a loose braid, and her face turned slightly toward the breeze, like she was listening to something only the wind could say. She looked up, their eyes met across the lot, no words, no gestures, just that long, loaded glance that said everything they'd been carrying in silence. Vanessa rose slowly, letting the book slide closed in her hand. She didn't move toward them, didn't call out. She just stood still, eyes wide and uncertain, heart flickering behind them like the porch light she hadn't turned on yet. Thomas opened the van door. Lily was already unbuckling, practically bouncing in her seat. "Can I go to her?" she asked, breathless. He nodded. "Go." Lily sprinted across the pavement, arms outstretched, a blur of boots and joy. Vanessa dropped the book and knelt just in time to catch her, both of them laughing, crying somewhere in between. Thomas stepped out of the van, slower, quieter. Vanessa looked up, her arms still wrapped around Lily, and met his gaze again. Still no big speech. Just the kind of look that asked, "Are you here to stay?" And in the stillness, Thomas gave the smallest nod, yes. And for once, that was enough. The sky blushed pink and orange as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long golden fingers across the clearing. The rest stop hadn't changed, it was still just a patch of gravel, a wooden table, and a few stubborn pines leaning against the wind. But tonight, it felt different, warmer, brighter, alive. Thomas knelt beside the same old portable stove, hands moving with quiet familiarity. He sliced peppers and onions on a cutting board balanced across his lap, a small cooler open beside him. Lily darted between the van and the picnic table, setting out mismatched utensils with the focus of a kid on a mission. Vanessa sat nearby, her legs tucked beneath her, sleeves rolled up, peeling garlic with clumsy fingers and a small grin. "You sure you want me doing this?" she asked, holding up a crushed clove. Thomas smirked. "You did fine with the cake." "That was a miracle," she replied. "This is sabotage." He chuckled softly, shaking his head as he dropped the vegetables into the sizzling pan. The smell rose instant familiar, humble, good. He stirred, the rhythm of it grounding him. They didn't talk about the weeks apart. Didn't try to explain or unpack what had already been felt in that long look across the lot. There was no need. Lily plopped down on the bench beside Vanessa, holding up 2 paper airplanes. "Guess which one's yours?" Vanessa pointed to the one with crooked wings. "The one that'll crash dramatically." "Correct," Lily said proudly. "But it'll look cool doing it." Thomas flipped the food in the pan and smiled. She's happy, he thought. And he was too beneath the tired, beneath the scars of doubt. Dinner was ready in minutes, just sautéed vegetables, rice, and a little cheese melted on top. Nothing fancy. No tablecloth, no wine, no music. Just 3 plates, a couple of plastic forks, and the gentle sound of cicadas waking in the trees. Vanessa took a bite and closed her eyes. "Okay, I take it back. You're not just a mechanic. You're a wizard." "I've been called worse," Thomas said, passing her a napkin. They ate as the stars came out, slow and unhurried. Laughter came easy. So did the quiet. Same stove, same fire. But everything had changed.